Welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur. Lots to chat about today. There's an ongoing cultural battle across Canada, around the world really, right? Progressive values clashing with our traditional conservative values. And today's guest believes that unless we see Christian norms and values return to public life in Canada and the U.S. and the rest of the globe as well. But our societies actually face a very serious social and cultural decline. Okay, that's a bit of an extreme statement, perhaps, but is it? Maybe not. So we're going to find out here today. All right, before we jump into that, a quick reminder to hit subscribe. Tell your friends about us. Always appreciate that. Our guest is Dr. David Millard Haskell. He's a former journalist, a sociologist at Wilfrid Laurier University, and also the author of a book called Christ or Collapse, The Case Against Godless Government. It's a very interesting book, I assure you. collegepress.com, or you can get the paperback version at Amazon. And so good to have you with us, David.
Well, thank you, Paul. I'm really enjoying our time together. I mean, we've spoken a bit in the past, and I'm looking forward to today's interview.
Yeah, very much so as well. I mean, the book is, again, bold. It makes people think. That's always a good thing. And it's divided into 4 parts. I believe the book is actually available in separate sections if you want to buy just one part that focuses on this angle and a different subject on the others, or you can buy all 4 together. But you want to give us a brief snapshot, I guess, of what you're trying to communicate to the readers.
Yeah, for sure. So this book is really, it's about advancing a political philosophy. And I know that sounds a bit dry to people, but it's a political philosophy that's been around since the founding of the United States and Canada. And the political philosophy is that of traditional conservatism. Now, traditional conservatism, we have a lot of different ideas of what conservatism could be. So I define it very clearly in the first chapter. But traditional conservatism, very simply put, is the norms and values of Christianity applied to governance. And my book is all about why we need to get back to that. And this is a restoration, by the way. This is nothing new. Christian norms and values did influence our laws and policies from the very founding of our nations. And it was only around 1960 that we saw that change to very detrimental effect. So my book, what it does is it begins by saying, let's take a look at what happens when you do follow these Christian norms and values. And then also let's look at what happens when you don't. And we have the experiment from the 1960s onwards. And I'm able to show that this is an empirical decision. This isn't a metaphysical decision you have to make. You may be a Christian, but you don't need to be to accept the empirical evidence that shows the norms and values of Christianity are really unmatched in bringing flourishing to both individuals and nations.
Yeah, and you have a book full of all kinds of studies to back up your opinions on this. And I know you also, you weren't always a Christian. I mean, you are now, but I think for much of your life, you didn't see that through that lens at all, right?
No, the Apostle Paul and I have a few things in common. We had a conversion experience. Now, mine wasn't a Damascus Road experience, but I actually became convinced that the conservative beliefs of Christianity were really legitimate. And I came to that through sociological evidence and psychological evidence. I know that sounds a bit odd. A lot of people have a spiritual awakening. Mine was more of an academic awakening. So around 10 years ago, I began looking into conservative Christianity, and I kept seeing that those who were following conservative Christian doctrine about sexual ethics, about really all the things that are the hot button issues today, those who were following it instead of rejecting it, they had the best outcomes. And in fact, whether you looked at towns or states or countries who did the same, the pattern was similar. They had better outcomes. And so I wasn't completely, I was more agnostic. I wasn't completely atheist at the time, Paul, like we're talking a decade ago.
Yeah.
I thought Christianity was good. I just rejected those parts that didn't align with the culture that didn't allow me to really fit in at a dinner party. You know what I mean?
Right.
But eventually I really had to reconsider, because as we were moving in this direction where society in general couldn't even define what a woman was, there was this contingent of people in North America who not only could keep reality in focus, but were thriving. And so I did my own research. I looked at the research of others, and the winner was those people who were practicing a very traditional Christianity. So eventually I had to humble myself, and I had to say, listen, you always say you're going to go where the evidence goes. That's what I tell myself. I say a rational person will change their mind on the introduction of new evidence. And I was seeing the evidence, and I said, wow, God wins. I've got to take this seriously.
I mean, if there is a God, if there really is, then I mean, that is, kind of a, yeah, I mean that's the default, right? Of course he's going to be right if there really is an all-knowing, omniscient God, right? So very interesting. And it's fascinating when I look at some of the leading atheists around the world. Some of them do openly admit that they would consider themselves cultural Christians, and they actually are thankful for the basics of Christianity over the millennium, because it has influenced society in such a positive way. So something to be said for that. Yeah,
there is, but I smile because I was like that, right? I was the kind of guy who was saying, wow, Christianity has done some really good things. I just don't want to associate myself with those cultural taboos that will make it difficult for me to interact with all my liberal friends. But it's a lot like saying, I really love apples, but I don't like apple trees. I mean, at some point, you have to say, well, where is this fruit growing from? And when you look at the tree from which all these good things come from, the tree is Christianity. And we've been systematically trying to rip it out by the roots. And my whole book is saying, listen, let's be humble. Let's admit that our forefathers, when they said that this stuff really is the key to success, they were comparing it to something else. They were comparing it to tribalism. They were considering what it was like to have all these in-group preferences. They were saying, there's this new model in town. And I'm talking even beginning 2,000 years ago, they were saying, this is new stuff. This is good stuff. And we just got very arrogant, and we began to think we were smarter. And the proof is in society as it declines.
Okay. Well, I always tell my kids, we all have to be open to the possibility that I'm wrong. Otherwise, you'll never find complete, whole truth. And I say that for myself as well. I believe I have found truth in Christ. But you know what? Everybody needs to have that approach. Otherwise, how would you ever find truth if we're not open to the possibility? Maybe I missed it somewhere, right? So you got to have that conversation. Always be asking questions. Now, you're not advocating for a theocracy, forced religious nation here, society. But again, you mentioned traditional conservatism. You want that restored in Canada. So people need to understand that, first of all.
Right. And we have models of theocracy that are even in society today. We've got countries that are Muslim majority countries that are theocracies, and they compel belief. They also limit the freedom of people to believe privately even. And I'm saying that is not a model to follow. I'm saying that the model we should follow is traditional conservatism, which I define. And traditional conservatism, from its very beginnings, we can even look at the beginnings of Canada and the US. Do people really think that Canada and the US were theocracies when they were embracing traditional conservatism completely? Right. No, they weren't. In fact, we have records by people like de Tocqueville, who came and he examined in the mid 1800s in the US. He's a French philosopher, and he's looking at the United States, and he says, I've never seen a place more free. I've never seen a place that has greater prosperity. And he specifically ties it to the Christian beliefs of the people. And he goes on to say that these moral underpinnings, these moral absolutes, are what actually generate the goodness that America was experiencing at that time, and indeed did up until the 1960s. So that was not a theocracy then, and I don't advocate a theocracy now. But what I do advocate is going with the best evidence. So if I can prove to you, and I do, in my book, chapter 3, I actually assemble the studies. Chapter 2, I show the history, and the history is that our founders always intended Christian principles to be governing the laws or guiding the laws of our land. And then in chapter 3, I go on and I say, and here's what happens when Christian principles, those norms and values, do guide individuals and do guide nations. And I show that they are unmatched in bringing flourishing. So I'm bringing that first. Before I ask you to commit to this project of traditional conservatism, I say, let's look at the evidence. And then you can make the rational choice. You don't have to make a metaphysical choice. I am a Christian, and I think Christians should be the first to advocate for this. But if you're not there, then just look at the evidence and follow it.
No, it makes sense to me. It does. Well, if you're just joining us here, we're talking with Dr. David Millard Haskell, and his book is called Christ or Collapse, The Case Against Godless Government, and that's available at collegepress.com or the paperback version available at Amazon. Now, your book is certainly going to offend people. I think that's just the way it is. And
I'm not, when you say that, I'm not laughing. I'm not delighting in that.
Yeah.
But this is a reality, and you either laugh or cry. So I kind of have to chuckle a bit, but sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, I think people will undoubtedly be offended one way or the other. But you know what? That's part of life. We all get offended at this and that, and we need to get over it and just look at the facts as best we can. And in fact, this book, you're wondering if it may be a bit of a test case for Bill C-9, which incidentally just got passed by our Senate in Canada. So, this is the Combating Hate Act. So your opinions here could cause people to feel uncomfortable and say, well, you know what? That Haskell guy, he's probably, provoking people to hatred. So maybe we need to fine him or maybe even jail him. You think?
Yeah, well, I think we don't know what is going to come of this Bill C-9. As you mentioned, it did just get final approval in the Senate. It'll go for ratification in our Parliament, which essentially is a rubber stamp. There's no indication that it is not going to be in full force very soon. It's called ironically called the Combating Hate Act, because indeed it is going to foment hatred against Christians. I mean, it really will. And my book may be the test case for that. And I'll tell you why. My book quotes Christian doctrine. It does so unequivocally. It does so in full support of that doctrine. But then it says, and look, the doctrine is corroborated by massive amounts of empirical evidence showing that when you follow it, you get flourishing, you get thriving, you get success, you get better mental health, all these things. But nonetheless, this new bill, Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, it has made that kind of activity potentially illegal. Again, my book may be a test case on this. And here's the reason. This new law removes a piece of, it's a clause within the criminal code. So in Canada, our criminal code governs what is legal and what's not. And section 319 of our criminal code, if you move down a little bit in section 319 of the criminal code, you've come to the section 3. And then you go to section 3B. And at section 3B, there was a provision. And the provision said, if you are making an argument in good faith and you are quoting scripture, then you cannot be convicted of hate speech. But that's removed now. This new bill removes that. And so it leaves my book or any kind of traditional Christian belief on same-sex marriage and how it is not biblically aligned, or the idea that you can have multiple genders, which again contradicts the idea in scripture that there are men and there are women and that's it. So there are definite conflicts soon to happen. And my book may be one of them. And I'm not sure how it's going to go. And I really hope that we can still have civil debate in Canada. And even more than that, I hope that Christians can say what they believe and not be afraid. Because it seems to me that they already are. Like I look at pastors today, and if you can go online and you can look at even the most what they brand themselves as a conservative pastor, the conservative Protestant, they're evangelical. They don't talk about these issues. And
Yeah,
so
because
we
we
already
are
see
we are
here.
worried about what people will think of us, and potentially could we lose our charitable tax status? I mean, I don't want to see churches lose it, but you know what? If we lose our tax status, so be it. We need to keep on teaching and sharing what we see as truth from the Bible, right?
This is something that's very close to my heart. Before I wrote this book, one of the major studies I did was a study of church growth and decline. It came out 2016, 2017. It actually did really well in terms of media coverage. Typically, Christian studies of Christianity don't do very well, especially in Canada. The media purposely ignores it. My first book, by the way, was called Through a Lens Darkly, and it looked at media bias in Canada, so I know what I speak.
Yeah.
So this other study that I did was about church growth, and it did get media coverage, and it was because it was so unusual. You see, popular culture tells us that if Christianity wants to grow, it has to abandon the traditional tenets of the faith. Its stand on traditional marriage, it's got to lose it. Its stand on traditional gender and gender roles has to lose it. And I did this study, and I surveyed a couple thousand people and the leaders of growing churches and also declining churches. And I found that it was exactly the opposite from the popular narrative. The extent to which churches and pastors were very insistent on traditional conservative Christian doctrine, their churches grew. And so that was
Yeah.
so unusual that the media actually covered it. It was in the Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, Maclean's magazine. But I would, from that, let me then take it to 2026 as I'm talking to you today. Again, pastors are making that mistake. They think by not speaking about these, what we'll call the hot button issues, where Christianity speaks very clearly, but they speak not at all, they are actually leading to the decline of their own church. But worse than that, they're leading their flock into the mouths of wolves. Because Christians are left with the idea, my pastor doesn't ever talk about this. We're either embarrassed about it or we don't have an answer.
Well, Jesus says, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you." Luke 6:26. Yeah,
Right.
you know what? We don't want to sit in the fence. It gets sore after a while. I'm just saying.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
And I think what we want people to like us. So we have this DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so lots of, yes, pastors as well as politicians, academics, mainstream media, etc. The claim is that DEI initiatives and policies are going to bring peace and well-being to our society. We won't hate each other more. We'll love each other more. But you put the stats out there from in your book that this is actually the opposite of what's true. Do you want to unpack that for us?
Yeah. Part of the impetus for this book was a study I had just done, and I was commissioned by a think tank, the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy. They're out of Alberta, and they said, "You're a social scientist. Can you take a look at the data surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and all that they're saying, and just tell us what the truth is based on the empirical data?" So I did that, and as you've noted, it's snake oil. Like, snake oil is like junk science. Snake oil is stuff that pretends to work and it doesn't. And that's what the research says. Meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is an aggregation of hundreds of studies, and then they run the numbers of those hundreds of studies and they see if something actually has an effect. Well, the effect of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and initiatives, the net effect in terms of doing anything good is virtually zero. And what the meta-analyses show is that the more rigorous the study, where they actually looked more deeply, they had a larger sample size, the more proof that it does nothing good. But on the other side, diversity, equity, and inclusion is conclusively doing harm. It's causing division, which is ironic because it says that it's going to bring unity. It can lead to less profits in your business if you are forcing it. It leads to less communication. And another thing, it leads to hatred toward whites.
Yeah.
So without increasing sympathy toward blacks, it does decrease sympathy for whites. So, the reason that it works into my book is I have in the middle section, I show what doesn't work. And DEI is one of the things that doesn't work. And then I compare it to what has worked and what will work. And it's God's idea of justice. And so after I explain what DEI is doing, and I bring the receipts and I show the studies showing that it is a train wreck, I say, you know what the biblical tradition has said for 4,000 years, and then Christianity has amplified for 2,000 years? It says, show impartiality. It says, treat people with true justice. It's simple and it works. Christianity has not always gotten it right, but the seeds of our correction were always in the words of Christ. And so, as we looked at what Jesus was saying, we always got back to it. We always were moving toward more impartiality. We were moving to a better model that would allow for greater success and greater opportunity. And we actually got there. If you look at the end of the 1960s, we'd gotten there. And then these activists came in and said, hey, you know what? That's not good enough. We're going to apply partiality, bias, and that will make things better. Well, that's ludicrous. That's completely wrong.
It's not,
and the data shows.
it doesn't make sense just even logically thinking that through. And again, often it's people from Europe considered to be the oppressors. And that's a whole other show there, but I think that's
right.
some of the justification that's used, right? Now, the book also tackles the always controversial topic of gender ideology. I mean, so you believe that this is actually accelerating instability in today's young people. That's, and I think you're probably right. Can you just explain what you mean by that?
And always, I'm saying, I try to give interpretation, but these ideas are not my original ideas. They are based in the research. And so I am trying to give as neutral a telling as I can from what the best research is showing. And it's pretty clear that, for example, just one study comes to mind. It was in the Scandinavian Journal of Psychology just a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago. And it looked at those people who are embracing the notions of what we call wokeness, of gender ideology, really more on the progressive scale, but a large part of it was the gender ideology side of things. And they suffer from just massive amounts of mental illness. At other points, I look at gender ideology itself, and I'm able to show again through the data, through the studies, national representative studies in the US, for example, that the kids who are embracing this ideology, this LGBT, especially the T side of things, they have very solid records of suicidal ideation that just blow away the other population, like the kids that don't accept these ideologies. And I think that healthcare professionals are ignoring this in the name of political correctness.
Yeah.
So that's just a smattering, but I have an entire chapter where if we look at the end of chapter 10 and the beginning of chapter 11, where I go into all this data saying we have a mental health crisis that is definitely exacerbated by gender ideology, and we need to be talking about it and doing something politically about it.
Yeah, I mean, if we use that same logic, so something is deemed to be true because somebody feels that it's true. If we applied that to the rest of society and how we make decisions and how we make laws and run the country, that would be ludicrous. And yet in this particular case, we say, yeah, go for it, and we will affirm you in that. It just doesn't, we're feeding a delusion, essentially. I mean, and that's, I don't mean that to be offensive, although I'm sure it will be, because I believe all people, including trans people, need to be treated with love, kindness, and respect and dignity. We do, but go ahead.
No, that is, I appreciate what you said. First of all, that is a message throughout my book. that every person is in the image of God,
Yeah.
and every person deserves compassion and respect. So that's unequivocal in my book. But at the same time, the Christian tradition says that there are times when the most loving thing you can do is tell someone the truth.
Yeah.
And you touched on this idea that there has been a shift in now you can only affirm, and certainly in Canada, that's the law. We
Yeah.
had what was called the conversion therapy law. It's mentioned in my book at length, and it said that if someone is suffering from gender confusion, the only thing that a practitioner who is a counselor or even a pastor can do now is say, how can I affirm your thought that you are not born in the right body? That's all
Yeah.
you can do. If you try to say, well, maybe we should wait a while. Maybe there's something else affecting.
It robs the person seeking counsel from getting the complete full counsel that they should be due to. They should have the right to in Canada. We probably need to do a follow up on this show. There's so many areas we still haven't touched on. About 30 seconds. Any final thoughts of how do we change our society to get back to this traditional conservatism?
Well, I think that it's going to be a difficult row to hoe, but it begins with knowledge, and it begins with perhaps my book. And I'm not trying to make a shameless plug there. Well, I can't help, but I am. But I'm saying I've tried to do this in a way that anyone could accept the facts. I'm
You know
trying to
what?
give the facts.
We need to get the facts. And again, your book has a whole bunch of studies with facts. And then we need to be bold enough to speak out and share this with our friends and coworkers. I'm out of time here. Thanks so much, David. So plug in here for your book, Dr. David Millard Haskell, author of Christ or Collapse, available at collegepress.com or on Amazon. I'm out of time. WizeUp.ca.